begin. Welcome to the Big Questions podcast, where we talk about love, death, sex, religion, and all the big questions worth asking. I'm your host, Robert K. Elder, and today we're talking with Wendy McClure, author of The Wilder Life and the Wanderville series, the second book of which is coming out October 16th. McClure also writes a column for Bust Magazine and is an editor at Albert Whitman and Co. Big Questions is sponsored by Shure, purveyors of professional microphones and headphones. You can check them out at shure.com. That's SHURE.com. And the Big Questions podcast is part of the Sun Times Media Podcast Network. Wendy, welcome.
Thank you.
Well, I want to touch a little bit again because the second Wanderville is coming out, and I was talking with another author about this, and it seems to me to be the exact opposite of dystopian future. Because she was telling me, like, oh, I'm writing this YA book and it's going to be a dystopian future. I'm like, what other kind of future is there? But yours seems to be like a hopeful past book.
Even considering all the sort of grim historical things that happen, I think it's a little bit of an optimistic view of some things in history, including the orphan train movement, which was... I wouldn't call that optimistic. It was, well, actually, it was optimistic in spirit. Yeah. But it was also a little, grim.
It was before child labor laws.
Yes.
So, and let's give people background. So, 1904, this this movement to give orphans homes, and they were literally just shipped onto a train.
Right. It was sort of the first social services experiment, and really the effort was to get kids out of the cities. This first started in the Five Points area of New York, and a missionary minister had this idea that the kids would be healthier out in the country, which of course is true, but also it was all kind of convenient from a labor standpoint as well.
Yeah. Well, and so I've done a lot of research on you and these books, and I confessed to you before that my wife is a fellow bonnet head, which is what we call, they're basically parrot heads. Parrot heads to Jimmy Buffett, bonnet heads to Little House on the Prairie. And you've written a couple of memoirs. One was, again, The Wilder Life and the My Adventures in the Lost World, A Little House on the Prairie, and the first one, which is I'm Not the New Me, which is about weight loss.
Right, yeah.
And so tell me about, I guess, those different facets of your life and switching gears. Because I noticed when you Google you,
right.
You have described yourself as professional obsessive.
Right.
So explain that to me.
Okay. Well, let's see. I think I'm Not the New Me was sort of a result of my blog that I was doing back around 2000, 2001. Mm-hmm. And then the book was sort of about the experiences of having that blog. And I was writing about about dieting, about dating, and it was also kind of the beginning of the whole blogging thing.
Yeah. You and Jen Lancaster.
That's right.
Who's going to be booked on this podcast in 2 weeks? No, next week. I go see her next week. Both got books out of that.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It was a really interesting time, and one thing that actually helped it sort of happen was just before I got my agent, I had a set of Weight Watcher recipe cards from the 70s, really sort of gross 70s diet recipes, like really weird things with like tuna on toast kind of recipes, or they call them tacos. They would put something on a piece of toast and they'd call it tacos, or weird gelled salads, like really weird gelled salads. And so I put it online with funny captions and it went viral. Oh. And so I guess that was sort of one obsession with these sort of hilarious, vintage things.
Well, and it's also sort of this trend, which I have myself tried to hop onto, which because I think it's brilliant. It's a way of blackmailing yourself into something.
Yes, yes.
So, they're like stunt books, like, The Year of Living Biblically, or, for The Wilder Life, you went to all of the Laura Ingalls Wilder, like, homesteads.
Right, yeah.
Which I'm going to confess that I've been to. Many of them. Not. I don't think I've been to Dismet. But
okay.
I may have stayed in a sod cabin.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Good for you. So you must have been in Minnesota.
Somewhere. Yes. Somewhere. We went to a lot of recreations and that sort of thing. So I'm coming back to this obsessive thread. What makes people so obsessive about Laura Ingalls Wilder, and I guess what I like to call for Laura and for the Wanderville book, cheap time travel?
I think really in the case of the Little House books, there was something about those books, and I think it's the point of view of the protagonist where you really kind of felt like when you were reading them as a kid that you were living this life, and that her memories become your own memories in a way. There's something about the subjectivity in the narrative. That's the editor and me talking. Yeah. But that really, you just really strongly identify with it. And so I think that is behind a lot of the obsession with the Little House books. And also just the idea that you become really sort of entranced with these stories, but then you sort of realize, oh, it really happened. It's based on real life.
Sort of.
Right.
So,
yeah.
Sort of.
Sort of. There's definitely lines between fact and fiction.
Yeah. But the one that broke my wife's heart is Jack the Bulldog.
Yes.
Like, Pa just gave him away. He did not have a peaceful death. He was just like, just a commodity. Gave him away.
Sold him with the horses. But he wanted to go with the horses. You know, they were a set. You know. I
guess. But and the other things that are interesting is this obsession. And again, you're not alone. My wife and many other people like this. It also allows you to separate fact from fiction. Pa was not Michael Landon.
Right.
He was squatting illegally.
Yes.
He kept running out on rent. They were leaving hotels.
Well, once he did.
I think once. Okay, we'll say once.
I'm kind of a defender of Pa,
Mom must have been miserable, though. Like, that's the other thing.
I think she knew what she was getting into. I don't know. I'm a Pa apologist, so
okay.
But I think it's definitely something that is played up in the book, and I don't know or the whole series. I don't know to what extent that was real life or whether that was sort of a literary device. I mean, because on one hand you sort of have, I think Wilder and her daughter Rose, who helped write the books.
There's team.
That's a team.
Yeah, there's team Laura and there's team Rose. Like that's the thing.
Oh, that's a whole other can of worms.
Oh yeah, among scholars, like they were written by Rose. No, they were written by Laura. And I think once you read their books apart, it's pretty clear that Rose could not have written all of them by herself.
Exactly.
And did not have that insight and also charm. She seemed to lack charm. Let me just say that.
Yeah, she was a little kind of a pill.
Yeah.
But one thing that I think she did contribute though were things like literary themes.
Yeah.
So and
structure.
Right, yeah. So I think maybe the idea, I don't know whether this came from her or from Laura, but the idea that Ma kind of represented civilization and then Pa kind of represented the sort of pioneering spirit, always wanting to go west. And so, I mean, I don't know how that played out in real life. We'll never really know, but sometimes when I talk to people about it, that you have to be sort of careful. Again, it's the fact from fiction thing, when you're seeing someone's, identifying with a certain character, how much is really, really biography and how much is really, maybe in the fiction.
Sure. But getting back to this theme of obsessiveness, there's something about those books in particular. There are a ton of historical novels and characters and memoirs, but Little House, because it was on the TV in the 70s and, played ad nauseum into the 80s. In fact, so I was an exchange student in 1992 in Sardinia, which is an island in Italy. My family watched Little House on the Prairie every afternoon.
Wow.
So it was a worldwide thing. And any of these places you go to, any of the little museums and the markers, full of Japanese. Japanese in particular love Little House on the Prairie. Why?
Well, one reason is when during the U.S. occupation after World War II, the Little House books were actually brought over as sort of an example of U.S. culture. So there were a number of books that were introduced to the Japanese people at that time, and the Little House books were among them.
What else was on that list?
I don't know.
All
I know the Little House books were. Possibly, I wouldn't be surprised if Anne of Green Gables was as well, because although that's Canadian, so maybe not. I don't know. But Little Women, a lot of maybe it's just also the old fashioned dresses. Maybe they really like those.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well, it's a weird thing because for, I think Americans, and please disagree with me, they love it because of just this thing, this go west young man, this pioneer spirit, this. I don't envision the Japanese having that as a cultural marker. So I'm always interested in why other cultures are drawn to very specific things in Western culture.
That's an interesting question. I don't know whether it's sort of just the period feel. I think, that is a good question. I don't know. I feel like I'd be really, really reaching if I did.
No, that's okay. That's okay. One of the other fascinating bits, especially in the Wilder books, the Wilder book, the Mount Wilder memoir, is this very personal part of it. And you have a theory about something you call unremembering. Can you walk me through that? Because I just found that just so fascinating.
I think, sort of the idea that these books sometimes sort of stand in for our own memories. Sometimes if there's something that is hard to deal with, and in this case, I realized towards the end of sort of doing all this, going to all these home sites, that maybe I was really thinking, kind of processing a lot about my mom passing away. There was no really sort of big connection with the Little House books. It's not like we read them together necessarily, but there was some sort of association, and I finally figured out what it was, which was that my mom was an Army brat and moved around from place to place. And when she was a kid, and some of our vacations, we never saw the Little House sites. I didn't even know you could go there, but I sort of understood the Laura Ingalls Wilder character, or the Laura Ingalls character, because of my mom, and because we would sometimes go visit these places on Army bases, and we'd look at some little house where she'd lived, and that helped me understand my mom, and I think I kind of projected that onto the Laura Ingalls character.
That's not hard, because Laura is sort of an Army brat.
Right,
She's taken from place to place. She doesn't have any choice. And
in the War of Manifest Destiny.
Oh my God! The thing I always think about also, so they lived in a dugout, which is basically like a hole in the ground, and all these other places. And they had how many children? Was it 3 or 4?
Let's see. They had, actually, it would have been, Laura Mary Carey. Actually 5, but the boy died. And he's not in the books.
The boy died, which is also why Half Pint is sort of the more masculine figure. She is sort of Paul's little boy.
Yeah.
But the thing I think about, and again, there's nobody else I can talk to about this because you've been to the same places. How did you have any privacy to have more children? Like, that's the other thing. It's just like, it's one room. Where is there any privacy?
You notice in the books they're playing outside a lot.
I guess
they are, and actually that's something that I really loved, and I still love about especially on the banks of Plum Creek, which is, there's so much about just that world of Laura playing outside, and she pokes a beaver with a stick at one point, or a badger, and there's the crab in the creek, and they're sliding down haystacks. They're just getting into all kinds of trouble
and getting leeches. Like that's
getting leeches.
That's the other part of it. I want to bring this to Wanderville as well, because the new book, the kids on this sort of imaginary town on wheels and these adventures that they have,
they're on their own.
Well, and they remind me of Laura a little bit because of this sort of. Again, correct me if I'm wrong, but this sort of skepticism towards religion and people of faith, which is tricky to do in a book for kids.
Oh, okay.
So how did you explore that, and what did you have to be careful of? And what? So tell me about that journey about writing about what they call them holy rollers.
Oh, okay. Well, in the story, in book 2, the kids. Now, I'll say I think it's just one of the characters, Jack, who really has this skepticism. I think for Frances, one of the other main characters, she's. She doesn't mind it at all, and she actually likes the services. But they find themselves taking shelter with a reverend and his wife and some of their kids. And I thought it was would be interesting to make them temperance activists. So they're on a farm, and there's sort of an interesting dynamic in that the reverend and his wife invite the kids to live under their roof, but they have to sort of really play by their rules and not lie. And so some of the kids are like, "This is great," but some other kids in their group of orphans or orphan train escapees sort of feel like they kind of want to be more on their own. So I think it's less about religion and more sort of about just sort of autonomy.
Well, and it seems to be, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, because you were the queen bonnet head. It seemed to be Laura's skepticism, especially with the people in the communities that she lived in, and Nellie Olson. It was more organizational that she was skeptical of and rebellious against. Is that fair?
Well, it's the whole thing with Laura Ingalls Wilder and faith and everything. It's a really, boy, you could do a whole podcast on that because a lot of people of faith really identify with the Ingalls family for various reasons, and big with homeschoolers too. A lot of homeschooled kids read the Little House books,
very
and some
bootstrappy,
right? Yeah, and then some of those folks are very religious as well. But the books themselves are not particularly religious. So people sort of have different. Everyone has sort of a slightly different Laura Ingalls Wilder.
Yeah. But what does the actual Laura Ingalls Wilder? What did her life illuminate, if anything, on that subject? How did she feel about faith? And again, maybe I'm reading into this, but again, Half Pint Laura Zanzender seems to be very wary of organized, high moral people.
I think that's sort of the. Actually, I think that's sort of the proto-libertarian tendency, which is some interesting backstory. We talked about Rose, who co-wrote the books, or actually at least helped.
Edited at the very least.
Yeah. But she is also sort of one of the founding writers of the libertarian movement. And a lot of ideas that she had, and to some extent her mother as well, got into the books about autonomy and independence. And again, this is the line between fiction and real life. They tended to emphasize the Ingalls family's independence in ways that weren't necessarily true. They depended on the government a lot more than the books will ever tell you, just because that didn't really jive with their sort of political views. So I think that's in there. So I think that's part of it. But as far as
but you're just saying the religious part of it might be tougher to untangle.
I think it's a little bit more just sort of about independence versus community, because I think they had mom saying mom was always devout. She sang hymns and they had the Bible and stuff, but they weren't in the sense that they prayed for things to get them through, at least not in the books. I mean, who knows in real life?
Sure.
But
I think they were followers of Joel Osteen in real life. Yeah. No, not at all. No. And I want to switch gears here because again, the Wilder life was sort of a memoir.
Yeah.
And the book before that again, I'm Not the New Me was a memoir. And sort of those three memoirs, Laura's books and then your two books, at a certain point, you're living your life in public. And you know, what are the ups and downs of that? Because I'm noticing, by the way, I see that Wendy is wearing a Fitbit, which I decided not to get. The new iPhone has an app that I'm like, oh God, I saved $100. But the thing is, so I know you wrote that book, and I know you have a Fitbit, so like I think I know more about you now.
Right. Yeah.
So and again, a Fitbit is a fitness bracelet that tracks your heartbeat for those people who don't know. So again, what are the dangers of living in public and sharing a lot of yourself and a lot about your relationships?
Yeah. Well, I feel like I've done a lot less of that in the past 10 years. I did a lot more when I was blogging on a regular basis.
As a reaction, you've done it
sort of as a reaction, and just sort of as a natural, like, I don't know. I mean, I think it's something that's really hard to sustain, and also, you know, sometimes when you put stuff out there, like, people notice that more than they notice what you don't put out there. You know, I mean, from sort of my standpoint, I don't feel like I have that much, you know, of myself out there, you know, anymore. I mean, I have a Tumblr now that I'll write about, you know, just I went here, I saw this thing, you know, but it's not that personal, I guess.
Sure, but that seems to be in reaction to how personal your work was. Is that fair?
I guess a little bit, but I mean, everyone sort of goes through this when you have a blog. You sort of go through this sort of negotiation because at first, I think, I mean, part of it is, I think, maybe sort of maybe denial or even sort of like a delusion at first. You sort of think no one's reading. And
then you're like, oh, wait, I did write about that. Podcasters have that as well.
Oh,
like, you know, especially comedians, you know, they're basically emotionally naked. And, you know, Mark Maron talks about this. And then I have people come up who think they know me because I've been in their head for hours and hours and hours.
Right. Yeah.
And authors, I think, have that as well. But, you know, how have you experienced that as an author, somebody who knows you well and whatnot? There's an assumed intimacy. How do you deal with that?
Let's see. Well, I think a little bit. Mostly, it's just been by dialing back a little bit. You think a little bit more about how you want. You know, you have your little rules about social media, and I think in my case, it's also even sort of more complicated by being an editor. And there are lots of people out there who want to have a children's book published, and so. And so then I will sometimes see cover letters, you know, from people who are trying to get a book published, and they might refer to something that they've read in like my memoir or something to sort of ingratiate themselves.
Right, but the thing is, that's what every writing book tells you to do. Is like find common ground with the editor. Yes, it does. It says, you know, what they tell you to do is, I noticed that you edited blank, or I know you're interested in Y. Maybe you would also find interested in my book.
Well, that's talking about your professional life. I mean, you know, that's one thing. I mean, if someone talks about a book that I've acquired, you know, that's I feel like that's fair game. But beyond that, I think there is, I mean, maybe that's sort of the problem with things today, is that there's so many, those lines are getting more, you know, blurred between sort of personal and professional, you know, especially in the world of social media, where you're sort of expected to, you know, have some kind of a personal brand and and sort of further your even, you know, even if you're not a writer, even if you're just doing, I know especially with working in publishing, you know, doing something to, you know, sort of promote your company or something. And
nothing will get you fired faster than making a misstep.
Right. Yeah.
You know, because then you're associated with the brand.
Yeah.
So let's talk about that just a little bit. So again, you're with Albert Whitman and Company, and you're in charge of the Boxcar Children books, which, you know, have a long legacy and are much beloved. And I wanted so you know, people come out of the woodwork trying to get children's books published. Tell me about hilarious rookie mistakes. So here's your chance to narrow down the amount of mail and missteps that people take. So give us advice. What are rookie mistakes? What should people not do?
Comic Sans.
Oh, Comic Sans, the font.
The use of Comic Sans font, especially in an email. Let's see. Saying in the cover letter that you've read the book to a friend's grade school class or a kindergarten class or something like that, and they loved it. I think it's a useful exercise, and it's fun, but Ursula Nordstrom, who is a famous children's book editor, and she actually worked on the Little House books and Where the Wild Things Are. She had a quote. She said, "Kids love it when you read them the phone book. They love it when when you pay attention to them, and they love that they got out of math that day because someone came to read them a story." So that doesn't go over. Let's see. Oh, finding someone to illustrate the story for you. If you've written a story, finding your next door neighbor or your brother-in-law.
Because publishers want to match artists.
Exactly. Yeah. The equivalent is kind of like if you wrote a screenplay and you cast it, using people from your life,
Yeah. Okay. But tell me about, again, egregious, hilarious missteps.
Well, yeah, I get those all the time. Let's see. Oh, well, this is not a misstep. I actually like it when we don't really have a mail slush pile anymore where people would send us stuff in the mail.
Yeah.
But back in those days, let's see. Once someone sent me an insect specimen. Because they're writing a book about bugs, and I was reading the cover letter. It was really early in the morning, and I was looking at the letter, and they were talking about how fascinating these bugs were, and it said, "I've enclosed one for you to look at." And I had just taken the letter out of the envelope, and so I had to go back and kind of look in the.
Okay, so don't send bugs.
Don't send bugs. Let's see. Oh, my favorite story is the manuscript inside a paper mache egg.
Well, that's cool.
Yeah,
that's cool.
Yeah.
Did you publish it?
No.
Okay. Okay. So,
but it came in a big box. Don't send flowers.
Okay.
Someone once sent flowers after sending a manuscript. Don't fax it.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. Don't. I'm really actually grateful for Arrested Development for exposing this, but don't put glitter in the.
Yeah, I was going to say that's a famous one. You just end up with glitter everywhere.
Right? Yeah.
So let's be proactive. So let's tell people okay, my best day is when I receive a letter that has blank.
Let's see.
We've told people what not to do.
Oh, what not to do.
Yeah,
Okay.
So we've told people what not to do. Now let's just help folks out. How do you send us a successful manuscript or cover letter, or what makes your day? Where you're just this is obviously going to work.
Right. Yeah. Well, I don't know. It's usually it's not in the cover letter. It's just you have to just send me a great story. But if I'll read on. I think people put too much importance in cover letters. People think it's like a kind of a magic or a query letter, which is something where can I send the manuscript? People tend to spend their whole workshops devoted to the art of cover letter and query letter writing, and it's not a sort of magic password. You really have to work on writing a good story, and if mostly I look at the cover letter to make sure that you're not crazy.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So don't be crazy.
Don't be crazy.
I think that's a good one. And speaking of crazy, you got your MFA in poetry. Is that right?
Yeah. A long time ago.
At the Iowa Writers Workshop. And a lot of great people have come out of that. Yeah. And I know, I actually have friends who've been in that, and they have that great sort of, legacy, but you chose not to go into poetry. Why?
Well, I did the program when I was really young. I was at Iowa as an undergrad, and then went straight into the program right afterwards. Mm-hmm. So I was there for 6 years, and like I said, straight out of getting my BA. And so I think I was kind of young and hadn't really sort of developed my own sense of what I wanted to do and what I wanted to write, but I was just so dazzled by the idea of doing the program and the faculty there, because it's a great program. And I really value my time there, and I think it was really great to especially learn writing in an atmosphere where especially with poetry, you didn't think about sales or marketability or anything like that. It was a really kind of pure environment. But I found that after I got out, because I think I realized I had dedicated so much of my time there, my writing, to maybe sort of pleasing different teachers, and kind of I learned how to win at MFA. but when it came time for me to really sort of be on my own, and I forget who the writer is, but there's a famous essay about this called "Writing in the Cold," and it's about the first 10 years after getting out of an MFA program.
Yeah,
and I didn't last for more than I didn't last 2 years in the cold.
Yeah, it's tough. Unless you're, like David Foster Wallace and your thesis is your manuscript.
Right, yeah.
Then you...
I mean, and a lot of times, I mean, you do write a thesis, a manuscript for your thesis, and some people, those get published. And actually one sign that I realized poetry wasn't for me is that my thesis manuscript was a finalist in the National Poetry Series.
Great.
And cool. It's a big contest, and there's actually lots of finalists because I don't know how many judges there are, but there's something like 3 or 4 different judges. So there's several winners. And I remember when I realized, there was the finalist process, and then you were supposed to hear at a certain period of time, and when the deadline had passed for hearing if you were a winner or not, I was so relieved.
Yeah.
And because I knew there was something, I wasn't ready yet, my work wasn't ready, and I realized that I just really wasn't as interested in it anymore.
Yeah.
And just like I said, just sort of lost it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, my whole read on that is like, I love Tony Hoagland, but there's already Tony Hoagland,
Right,
like,
right,
I can't beat Tony Hoagland because he's already there.
Yeah.
I wanted to talk real briefly. So you're also our guest editor in Oak Park, and for the Oak Leaves. Mm-hmm. And so you grew up there. Give me sort of a biographical tour, the people and places that shaped you there.
Let's see. I grew up right around what is now Percy Julian School, but at the time I was the last class of Hawthorne School when it was a junior high, and so I was right around Madison and Ridgeland, and we lived in a Gunderson home, which is I guess an architect who did these sort of great sort of 4-square type houses. And I love the neighborhood. And actually I live up in the Ravenswood Manor neighborhood now, and they sort of have a lot in common, in the sense of they're about the same age, and just the big old trees and the sort of old cracked sidewalks. And
so you find comfort in that sort of arrangement.
Yeah.
What about literary influences? Were there things in Oak Park that you can say, like, okay, that pointed to me having a life as a writer?
Let's see. I think just being close to the libraries. We were just a few blocks from the Maze Branch Library, which is...
It's my library.
Yeah. I love that library. And I still have this really visceral memory of the drinking fountain that is no longer there. I checked. But that had just like this really satisfying gurgling sound. And it would come from like deep in the pipes, and the water would always just taste really good. And just being in that book section.
Did you spend a lot of time there as a kid?
I did spend a lot of time there, and also Maine. I'm a little actually nostalgic for the old Maine Library building. The new one is great, but I like that sort of, what is it, like it's late 60s, that international style.
Yeah.
And I actually have a really strong memory of being there in the summers at the end of high school, and also between high school and college, and just spending lots of time in there. And I think I was discovering Margaret Atwood at the time. And I think I discovered a shelf full of the journals, and
well, there's a great sort of bit about Ray Bradbury and Waukegan, because he basically grew up in that Carnegie Library there, and he talks about the books being like spices, pulling them off the shelves.
Oh yeah, and then also Barbara's bookstore. When I first started going there, well, actually, there were two things. There was a big Crocs and Brentanos downtown. It was a few doors down from the Lake Theater, and so I remember going there. And then at some point, I discovered it was a little tiny location over on Marion Street for Barbara's, and it was really just sort of a long, narrow storefront, and it had the best kind of book smell, like starch glue kind of smell.
Yeah, I was going to say, you as a book editor know more than anybody else that when people say, "Oh, I love that book smell," what you're smelling is the glue.
Is the glue,
and the not only that, but you're smelling the decay of the glue. So like, let's romanticize glue.
And I remember buying my first poetry books there. And because it was the first place where I'd really sort of seen a poetry section. And, it became a little bit less surprising later when Borders and B&N opened and they had their own poetry sections. But at a great old indie like Barbara's was, seeing that for the first time. And I bought, I think it was an anthology for Plowshares magazine. And
very cool.
So,
so as part of your duties as a guest editor, you chose a charity. Can you tell us who that is and why?
It's Metropolitan Family Services, and I chose it because it seemed like a good place that does family services, foster care, and also things sort of dedicated to keeping families together. And that seemed really sort of apropos to me just because of, in the Wanderville books, there's so much about the kids being sort of taken away from their homes and sort of a well-meaning program that, a sort of program that takes kids away from their homes. And also just, it made you realize just how little they had in terms of those services back in those days, and the orphan trains were sort of the beginning of that. But something like Metropolitan Family Services
would have helped.
Yes.
Definitely would have helped. Well, and one of the things I told you I wanted to touch on, and I totally forgot, was this sort of fantasy of children alone.
Yes.
And so I want to come at it a different way, and I want to ask, how do you think you personally would have fared as an orphan train passenger?
I don't think I would have.
You're resilient.
I'd like to think of it, I think every kid in their mind, I think likes to think of themselves as sort of resilient.
Oh, my kids do.
Oh, yeah.
They barely need me. Ask them. 6 years old, they're doing fine.
Right. Yeah. I would have been a big crier.
Oh, well. But what is it about this? And again, you've had this not only as a writer, but as an editor and guiding people through this, because, there's that whole Disney thing, like, woe if you are a parent in a Disney film, because you are either dead, going to die, or just absent. So why do we have that structure? And like I said, I think you come at it a different way in the Wanderville books. Okay.
Well, I think it's really kind of almost a tradition in children's books. And I think it comes from the idea of, books are one of the first places where we really kind of become ourselves. And so I think the idea of having, developing your sense of self and having that autonomy is so important. And so I think, I don't know, what it is about the sort of, mythology or whatever of, literature that sort of led to that. I think for one thing, life back then meant a lot of dead parents.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say, but who do we blame for the structure? Do we blame, J.M. Barrie and Peter Pan, or do we blame Huck Finn?
I think we blame the world, or we blame the lack of social services. That's what we do.
But that structure allows us a certain sort of freedom and autonomy. But you've come at it a different way in Wanderville, and that is, they are children who are not completely free and they experience loss. Like there's an echo of loss.
Yeah. Well, actually, the interesting thing I have to say about the orphan train program is that actually it's a little bit of a misnomer because not all those kids were orphans. Some of them were actually given up by their families in hopes of a better life, or they just couldn't take care of them. Yeah. So it wasn't always dead parents, but it was sort of the sense that they were sort of better off. And so I think I sort of take that to sort of another level. And also just the idea that, this is something I think actually history has left kids on their own an awful lot. And I thought about what about turning that into kind of an adventure story?
I think that's a good place to end. So our guest has been Wendy McClure. Her new book comes out October 16th. It's Wanderville, On Track for Treasure. Wendy, thank you so much for being here with us.
You're welcome.
Again, the Big Questions podcast is part of the Sun Times Media Podcast Network. Our music is by Hernan Sanchez. Thanks for joining us.